Catherine van de Velde. I'm the Project and Communication Manager of the PROWATER project at the Flemish government. We are halfway there, that is, of the project, but we are still far away from solving current and future water supply challenges in the Interreg 2 Seas regions. Still, together with the 10 Flemish, Dutch and UK project partners, we are happy to report on the first building blocks that PROWATER delivered during this midterm event. With this Interreg 2 Seas project, we want to build resilience against drought, as well as extreme precipitation, by investing in nature-based solutions and, in our case, ecosystem-based adaptation. With the financial help of the European Regional Development Fund, we are demonstrating ecosystem-based adaptation measures in the UK, Flanders and the Netherlands, and providing the tools that can allow regional actors to implement a long-term vision on water supply challenges. The keynote speakers today will go more in depth on these tools, as well as the long-term vision building process, and plenty of time is foreseen for discussion and Q&A with you. So question and answer rounds. During the pitch talks, we will virtually visit some of the demonstration sites where these EBA measures are implemented, where they will improve the infiltration and water retention capacity of the landscapes. And within the project, priority was given to areas of strategic importance for drinking water production. So I'm gladly giving the word to Dr. Nick Paling. Nick Paling, a project partner and also steering committee member of PROWATER and head of evidence and engagement at Westcountry Rivers Trust in the UK. And okay. The floor is yours.
Shall I start?
Go ahead.
I've started a timer because, as I recently said to a colleague, this may take half an hour and it may take 2.5 hours. So we'll see how it goes. I'm just gonna go through it, and if it gets catastrophically late, then you can just switch me off.
All right, I will keep track.
Okay, if you confirm that you should be able to see something rather horrendous at the moment.
I can see a slide. I wouldn't say it's horrendous, but
but the least said about that, the better. So thanks. Thanks, Catherine. Hello, everybody. Hello. I like keeping it in that spelling. I'm just gonna. There's a few opening slides here. The statistical information that you require is on the screen now. Not particularly personal. Mike, for me, the quote that I selected was a no-brainer. It's the one that I've kind of gone back to over and over again recently, which is Greta Thunberg saying that we do need hope. Of course we do, but the one thing we need more than hope is action, and I think that's quite a good motto for PROWATER. So I'll put that one in, and then the other killer fact is a fairly straightforward one, which is a lot of the models show that by 2050 summer flows in some of our rivers could be 50% lower than they are today, and I think that comes as a stark reminder of why this project is so important. Obviously all of our projects are important, but for me personally, PROWATER is right up there because we're really trying to tackle some of these huge issues that are coming ever closer in terms of threat to our health and well-being and or even our way of life. So I stole this expression. So I recently had a conversation with someone from the Department for Environment in the UK, and he used an expression, social planning for nature, which I quite liked. There isn't much about it, but so I borrowed it basically for PROWATER to describe the process that we're trying to go through. And my talk, unlike Jan's, is on a different focus. It's a different part of PROWATER that I'm looking at. Obviously, there's a huge technical element to PROWATER, and there's a big element focused on ecosystem-based adaptation and restoration of natural capital and water resources in the natural environment. But there's also a big focus, a parallel focus about communicating and influencing and encouraging all people all right across society to come together to create a new shared long-term vision for a sustainable water future. And the picture very specifically chosen because the sprinkler is encapsulates for me all of the behavioural psychology, all of the challenges that we face in terms of trying to persuade people to use less water, because particularly in the UK, a lot of people are very fond of these bits of equipment, and they could potentially be our undoing. So very quickly, I'll rattle through what I'm gonna say to you. I'm going to outline very briefly the challenge that I think we face, and then I'm just going to sort of take you through the narrative. Hopefully, most of the stuff that I'm going to present is in the language that we would use to try and communicate with different stakeholders, particularly citizens and communities. There's some quite technical stuff in there, but I'm going to gloss over that and just put that in as a contrast. So the first thing we need to do is define the system. What are the features in the system? Some people call those capitals. We need to learn the language of sustainability and resilience in order to communicate about the system to the people that we want to influence and talk to. We need to learn the language in order to study and understand the system. We're doing a lot of work characterising the various elements. That I use the word assets a lot, but it's a fairly cold word, particularly in relation to natural assets, natural features. And we also are looking at system services, so the functions that different features in the landscape provide, particularly in terms of water, but also across the sustainability agenda. We're doing a huge amount of work, as Jan has already described, and in the other case studies, looking at the condition and performance of particularly natural features, individually and collectively in the landscape. And then the final thing really is to change tack and think about people in the water system. People are a fundamental part of the water system, and we neglect them at our peril. So, and that's where the social planning for water bit comes in. How do we win hearts, change minds, co-production of shared knowledge, co-production of a shared future vision, and then collaborative action, changing behaviour, working together as a collective to deliver the future resilient water environment that we need. So I'll begin. The challenge is fairly straightforward kind of stuff. These are some slides that I put together to talk to the public recently. Water is important, and to humans, to wildlife, to all sorts of different ways. This is not rocket science, but what we do as a species is that we put huge demand and huge pressure on the services that the water environment provides us with. We use the environment to dispose of waste. We place huge demands on water. It's absolutely inherently important in the production of our food, and yet in doing that production, in making that food and drink, we often compromise other things that water does for us. It's a tangled web that we operate in, but we've got human beings doing some stuff to water which is hugely damaging for other people, and that doesn't make a lot of sense if you think about it in a holistic way. The water environment provides us with huge benefits in terms of health and well-being, and obviously it's vitally important to sustain wildlife and biodiversity. And these fellas here don't necessarily appreciate the way that we treat their water environment. And so we end up with a situation, rather than it being wonderful and all these benefits flowing from the water environment, we end up in a situation where the environment becomes stressed, and it starts to, as it degrades, it starts to not provide benefits, but in fact provide disbenefits. And so some of these graphics, this is the Central England temperature record since 1659. It shows quite clearly the 1.5 degrees of warming that we've had in recent years. And then someone from the Environment Agency put some forecast lines onto this to show where we're kind of heading into the future. And there's a really strong message here, but the question is, how do we craft that message and how do we communicate that message to people so that A, we don't scare them, and B, because there is quite a lot of warming still to come that is locked in. But we want to have a proper conversation about some of these issues, but there's some pretty alarming stuff out there. This is some of the data work that was done. This is very early in ProWater. We were working with the University of West of England in the UK, and they've done some scenario assessments looking at some of the potential falls in summer flows in rivers. This is where that statistic that I came up with at the start came from, and this was kind of us starting out in ProWater. Someone from the Environment Agency recently conceded to me that the state of the environment data reveals that in many areas improvements in the water environment and many water services have stalled, which I think was quite an honest statement from the agency. And clearly the effects of climate change will only exacerbate this over coming years, and this is where I signpost to a brilliant piece of work that's been done by the ProWater partners, the report on the risks and challenges and opportunities for sustainable water resources across the cross-border area of 2Cs. And there's some great graphics in this report, and I recommend strongly that you read it, but it really does set out the case for where we are at the moment and some of the challenges and risks that we face. And then the same person from the Environment Agency followed up that statement previously by saying that they thought that high-level improvements to water management in the short to medium term could be achieved if we implement the existing policies and policies mechanisms better and more to address policy gaps around land use, development, water resources management. He said that we need a more robust framework for intervention tracking, post-intervention appraisal and policy appraisal. And most importantly of all, I think he said, we need to work towards describing whole system transformation by working with all stakeholders to develop a shared vision, which obviously was quite neat because he wasn't necessarily aware of ProWater, but that's pretty much a mission statement for the project. So that was, and so it chimed with me that he'd said that, this idea of whole system transformation in a collaborative way, building a shared vision, and that's exactly what ProWater is trying to do. And then throw into the mix this little fella here. COVID-19 has been a slap in the face, I think, for all of us. And it's really brought home the fact that we do need to change the way that we do things. I think the other risk with COVID-19 is that it's been a massive distraction from what I think is a bigger threat that lurks in the slightly longer term future. And so we have, as people are interested in water resilience, we have to wrestle the agenda back off COVID-19 and remind people, so it makes our job even harder. Defining the system, well, obviously we want to take a whole systems approach. We conceive of the whole system, water runs through the whole system, and we have to think about every single aspect of the system in order to understand how it affects water and how water affects it. So we come up with a fairly straightforward way of a sort of capitals approach, a modified capitals approach, essentially dividing the system up into three main components: the natural water system, and obviously you've had a huge amount of information from Jan and others in relation to the work of ProWater focusing on that. In addition, you have the social water system, so this is the human, social, socio-cultural side of things. So individuals, communities, and a whole raft of other features that sit in that side of the system. And then sitting between the two, you have environmental infrastructure and technological solutions. So this is the mechanisms, the equipment, the pipes, the infrastructure that sits between these two systems that allows us to essentially benefit from the other system, but also to put pressure on it. So we define the system and then we pick it apart and we say, right, what do we know about each of these different bits, and how do we make sure that each one is resilient, each one is sustainable, each one is delivering what it should and needs to do in order for us to benefit from having a system that works well. So just very quickly, I'm just going to rattle through a bit about this learn the language. So this whole thing about, as you try and develop a narrative with stakeholders, with communities, with whoever, is about language. It's about finding the right words. It's about finding the right narrative about value, about issues. And I found this word cloud, and I was looking at it, and I thought, what's wrong with it? And I realised it doesn't have water on it, which I thought was a bit of a mistake. But that's actually indicative, I think, of the way the world sees these issues. Doesn't have regenerative on it. That's quite a new word. Collaboration's not on it. Resilience isn't on it. And I think that ProWater has a really key role here, an opportunity to try and develop a really strong narrative about all of these things, which are all so intrinsically connected together. Use the word resilience a lot. Comes from, I think, the Latin of resilio, which is the ability to bounce back. So a football manager once coined the word bounce back ability. actually he was quite accurate in his use of that word to describe the resilience of his team. And there's some really great documents out there. I won't read through these, but there's a paper a few years ago looking at principles for enhancing resilience, and some of the stuff in here is pure gold. Maintain diversity and redundancy, manage connectivity, broaden participation, promote polycentric governance systems, all of the stuff that we now think about in terms of transformative change and a transition towards a sustainable future. Sustainability, of course, the avoidance of the depletion of natural resources in order to maintain an ecological balance. Colleagues from senior researchers from the Environment Agency have written this definition of sustainable water management, which is I've included here because it's quite useful. It's a bit of a mouthful. Sustainable water management requires the coherent management of both man-made and natural infrastructure and processes to maintain the availability of sufficient water of appropriate quality for all of society's uses and the environment at all times, whilst also ensuring an appropriate level of protection from and resilience to flooding. So not much then. And it will do so in a manner that is socially and economically just, fair, and that protects and enhances the natural environment for both current and future generations. So there's a wonderfully ambitious vision statement, but it could very well be this vision statement, the mission statement for ProWater as well. Of course, we're familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. There's a couple on here which are obviously very relevant for water, but they've come under a bit of criticism in recent months. This is the SDGs, because they are a bit dissociated. It's not particularly integrated, and you may be familiar with this diagram, which talks about beyond sustainability and about regenerative cultures. And this was put together, and I've borrowed it from Christian Wahl, who was the man who invented Three Horizons, and I'll come on to that in due course. This idea that sustainability in one dimension is only the minimum that we need to get to, and actually we need to go beyond that to sustainability in multiple domains in an integrated way. And he put the SDGs in the middle here, and this expression I really like, the SDGs is a bridge towards regeneration. So we can't think that getting to the SDG compliance globally is enough, and plus the fact we're almost very unlikely to in the short-term future. It's about getting to that position so that we can then transition into a different way of doing things in the future. So it's really interesting. I mean, we're learning a lot about all this stuff, but it's hugely valuable from a ProWater perspective, because we're always trying to work out, what are we trying to do? Where are we trying to get to? What is it that we're actually trying to achieve? We want a regenerative water management system, and how do we get there? And what does it look like when we do? And that comes up, the next sort of bit of language is around the nexus, the food, water, energy nexus. The water, energy and food nexus is a wonderful piece of language. It's a really interesting model, and it's defined as water, food, energy connections lie at the heart of sustainable economic and environmental development. It's central to sustainable development. Demand for all three is increasing, driven by rising global population, urbanization, etc., etc. The inextricable linkages between these critical domains require a suitably integrated approach to ensuring water and food security and agriculture and energy production are sustainable. And I heard someone calling the expression nexus convergence, by which they meant sustainability in multiple domains. So looking at bits of the landscape, looking at bits of the system and saying, is it sustainable, but also is it sustainable across all of the sustainability outcomes? I mean, it's all waffle and different types of language and different ways that people talk about these things, but you have, in order to communicate these issues to people of all different levels of knowledge and understanding, we have to really delve into this so that we understand how they work. So the nexus, there's some wonderful graphics about the nexus. Some people call it water, energy and food. Other people extend it with land, climate, and we've even considered adding society or social sustainability into it as well. It's a whole systems approach. It shows the interconnectedness of things. It shows that you can't just focus on water. You can't just look at the water system in isolation, because it's so connected with other parts of the system. So you have to, therefore, in order to know what to do in relation to water, you need to understand how it connects to those other parts of the nexus. It's a really key sort of lesson that we learnt through this process. And the final one I want to talk about is Three Horizons. You may be familiar with Three Horizons. The Three Horizons is a model that came from business, but it's been adapted for regenerative approaches. it's a method for making sense of cultural transformation, of social transformation, of economic transformation. This idea that the first horizon is the established situation of where we are, and that if you want transformative change, we need to get to a third horizon, which is this future vision of what we want to get to. But you can't just break the old system down, get rid of it, and then create a new system. The world doesn't work like that. And so you need Horizon 2, which is the transition stage. And I found this version of 3 Horizons. I've just put it in because it's really interesting. It came from the Welsh Health Authority, the Health Service, and they put this diagram together. And you don't have to read all of this, but Horizon 1 is the dominant way of doing things now. Horizon 2 are innovations that help you shift to the future scenario, the new normal. And Horizon 3 is where we want to get to in the future. It's that vision of what we want it to be like in the future. And for me, PROWATER is a brilliant Horizon 2 project. It's putting all of these different building blocks in place that will help us get to that vision of the future. And the vision building exercise in PROWATER is a critical part of that, but so is all of the other stuff that we're doing in terms of opportunity mapping, targeting, ecosystem restoration, and all the rest of it. You can't just get rid of the old system, but it's absolutely clear that nudging and adjusting the system we currently have will not get us to where we want to get to. So I think it's widely accepted that we do need transformational change in the way that we manage our water resources particularly. I'm not going to dwell on this for too long because I'm looking at the clock and time is passing, but Horizon 2 innovations are really interesting. You know, I've said that PROWATER is a Horizon 2 innovation project, if you like. There's this idea that some Horizon 2 innovations are H2+, so these are the things that stick around. These are the things that get us into Horizon 3, but then keep us there. Horizon 2- innovations are things that come up, but they end up getting sucked back into Horizon 1 because they lose some of their magic, if you like, if they're not managed in the right way. Rather than becoming a transition innovation to Horizon 3, they end up getting institutionalized. And 2 things came to mind as examples of this. For me, WFD, the Water Framework Directive, is a brilliant example of a Horizon 2 innovation. It's 21 years old, WFD, and when it first came out, I think it was a Horizon 1 busting directive. It's a wonderful thing, but what's happened is the way it's been interpreted and the way that it's been moderated and the way that it's been implemented means that it's become somewhat sucked back into Horizon 1, i.e. business as usual. And I think the other thing that's emerged obviously very recently is the Green Deal. And for me, what I've seen of Green Deal is that it is hugely progressive, and it's a huge opportunity to help us transition into Horizon 3, a new future way of doing things. But there is a worry that some of the response to the Green Deal has been a bit Horizon 1, as we might say. And there is a risk that even some of the wonderful aspirations and innovations that are in Green Deal end up being sucked back into the old way of doing things. So I find all this stuff incredibly fascinating, and it's incredibly useful as well as a way of understanding what we're trying to do with PROWATER. Right, I'll move on. So the next thing we've been doing a lot of in PROWATER is looking at the features and the system services. Obviously, it's an ecosystem services kind of project, ecosystem restoration project. So this is looking at all of these different bits of the system and saying, do we understand how they work? Do we understand how they contribute and what functions they perform? Do we understand their current health? And do we understand what their health or function needs to be in the future in order to make a full contribution to sustainability outcomes? We've got lots of it back in the early days of PROWATER. It seems a long time ago now, certainly pre-COVID. We spent a lot of time doing some very technical work. This is just an example for part of our area where we worked to develop a conceptual model focusing very much on infrastructure and the way that the water management infrastructure in our area interacts with the natural environment, and looking at the way the system kind of functions. I think that's really important work. It's not particularly public facing in terms of communication and engagement. And the next slide comes with a health warning. So we took this model and we turned it into a system dynamics model, which is a small part of which is shown here. Now there will be a test at the end to see how much of this you remember. There are 10 items, no, I'm only joking. there are not 10 items on here which shouldn't be there. This is really important work that we did at the start of ProWater, because we knew we needed to try and understand the system better. And we've got water companies from the UK in the ProWater partnership, and that's been hugely useful, being able to bounce ideas off them, talk to them, understand what they do and how they work better, so that we can understand better how it interacts with the other parts of the system. Not very citizen focused. And so we kind of break it down then into a much more simple narrative. So this idea that features, maybe natural assets, or they may be bits of infrastructure, provide different services, and that translates into benefits that flow through to beneficiaries. And the ability to do that is a function of their quantity, extent, their condition, their health, and where they are in the landscape. So this is a really key sort of very simple concept. It's very linear, and it's not linear in real life, but you can ask questions about, are the system services provided, what level of system service is being provided? Is it enough? Is it resilient? How vulnerable is it to negative impacts disrupting it? Is it sustainable? Is it sustainable in multiple domains? And so we're starting to look at different bits of the landscape in different ways, and trying to work out some of these questions. And I think we're doing an amazing job in ProWater right across the piece, in terms of looking at natural environment particularly, but also starting to look at the social cultural bits of the system in the same way. The other key thing in terms of balancing supply and demand of water is that you have to think about demand, and this brings us to this issue of the human beings in the system. There's a demand. What's the capacity of the system to meet that demand? What are the cost implications of continuing to meet that demand, especially if that demand is increasing? So I would argue that for ProWater to be successful, civil society, consumers must be part of the solution. We cannot leave them. We cannot fix this through improving the environment on its own. So again, we're very hot off the press. Very recently, we started to work again with the Environment Agency and some other organisations to try and assess this in a more whole system kind of way. So identifying broad capitals, natural infrastructure, and social cultural assets, and then thinking about what system services do they provide and what level of service is currently being provided. That's really important to understand. How is the natural environment regulating water? How is any of the system working? How is the water management infrastructure working? We can visualize that in terms of trying to set a baseline. In 2050, we might expect the assets in the landscape to be functioning in a particular way under a business as usual kind of scenario. Fine, okay. But the other side of the equation is we're starting to look at the nexus. So we've identified a whole series of what we're calling sustainability outcomes right across the nexus. So, and these are different. So these are to do with, there are water elements of the nexus, but there are also land, food, energy, climate, and social elements of the nexus as well. And we need to assess how those are being delivered. And we can come up with a fancy wheel for that as well. That's kind of beside the point. But the key point I'm trying to make, and bear with me, is that these things interact. So of course we're focused on how natural assets affect water regulation. Obviously that translates into sustainability outcomes in the water part of the nexus. But it's actually recognising there are multiple assets, there are multiple features in the landscape which provide multiple services which all connect through to different parts of the sustainability nexus. And basically the message is it's complicated. But I think the key thing with this is that you can't just, if you're interested in water sustainability, you can't just focus on natural environment and the water cycle. You have to focus on a whole raft, obviously water management infrastructure, but there's a whole load of synergies and trade-offs that we need to consider. And most importantly of all is this connection. We will not get, you don't get sustainability outcomes in water that you want if these key system services aren't in place. So they kind of rate limit our ability to deliver a sustainable, resilient future, even under just the water part of the nexus. So this is a kind of a thought experiment that we're going through, but trying to conceive of a whole system. I try and understand how all the bits of the system and the services and functions they fulfill connect through to the vision on the right hand side. That's our future vision. At the moment, this is a hypothetical 2050 Horizon 1 kind of vision, which is if we stick to business as usual, if we carry on doing what we're doing, where will we end up by 2050? And the answer is not with a fully sustainable, resilient future that we want and need. And will we be resilient with those kind of sustainability outcomes? I'm only guessing, but I would guess not. There's a really important message lurking in there. So the final part of this is obviously having gone through all of that. The point I'm labouring is to try and emphasise how important it is that we consider people in the water system, and that we develop a really strong and robust communication strategy to bring them along in the process. If demand for water continues to spiral upwards, then it doesn't matter how much ecosystem-based adaptation we do. I think it very unlikely that we'll have a sustainable water future. Notwithstanding the fact that, again, we always with the caveat that technological solutions may make a big contribution to helping, but I really don't see how we can have a sustainable, fully integrated, sustainable future and resilient future if not all parts of the system are resilient. COVID-19 has taught us that very, very clearly indeed. The weakest and most vulnerable of us are the least resilient and the most susceptible to these impacts, and that is not fair or equitable. So the people side of things. So over here on the right hand side, we've been doing a lot of work, obviously in ProWater, looking at all of the different components, individuals and citizens themselves, their communities, the whole load of other features, other assets in the social side of the system. Policy, governance, local and national, collaboration, institution, skills, money, of course, and various other things, resources. Time is a key asset in the social water system. Now, in the early days of ProWater, we spent a lot of time, and rightly so, focusing. There's a whole work package focused on this. Work package 1 is focused on payments for ecosystem services, and we spent. This is an early slide. I apologise for the nature of it. Again, we're trying to work out who we're trying to talk to in this system. Who do we need to win around to our idea? Buyers, obviously, really important. Regulators and sellers are really important. We spent a lot of time identifying who these people were within the project and within our demonstration areas. And obviously this idea of the critical role of a knowledge broker, whoever that is and whoever they work for, playing this key role as a broker. But what was missing obviously from this was the beneficiaries, the citizens, the communities, civil society and consumers. And so I think this work that we did was incredibly important, and there's quite a big report that we wrote summarising all of this work. It's absolutely vital that these actors in the system are engaged and willing and interested in participating in schemes like ProWater, but that's not enough. And so we've had to move forward from this foundation to then bring in these other audiences that we need to win round. So again, another early slide, but this idea of the knowledge broker, whoever that may be, needs to understand all the needs, societal demand, problems, issues, who needs what in terms of natural environment benefits, ecosystem service benefits, water benefits, but also on having a conversation with those people to understand what they want, building a consensus, building a shared vision about what people want the future to be, their life to be like in the future, or their organisation to be like in the future. The knowledge broker has to understand the data and evidence relating to suitability for ecosystem restoration, or the suitability for nature-based solutions, or the opportunity for nature-based solutions to be delivered. Where should we deliver our interventions in order to get the outcomes that we want and need? What is the capacity of the landscape to receive those interventions? Thinking about trade-offs, we've already had the conversation earlier about weirs, beavers, various other nature-based solutions which can have negative consequences for other parts of the nexus in terms of sustainability outcomes. In that case, fish migration or increased flood risk, or whatever we might be the negative results of what we do. And then this idea of opportunity, so about synergies, agility, and adaptability in delivery, again, building consensus, again, where is there an opportunity to piggyback what we do on other agendas? This idea of the nexus obviously being a big interconnected set of sustainability indicators. Where are those lines that connect bits of the system to the outcomes that we want? And who knew, you know, the idea of some of these innovative wastewater treatment works, which are now generating energy. So they're connecting through to the energy part of the nexus. They are using wetlands to clean up, to polish effluent. There's some really wonderful connections where you know, people are growing food in situations where they wouldn't necessarily have grown. It's a real idea of nexus convergence, of thinking about how can we create one of these features so that it does all sorts of things in the system, rather than just doing well the one thing that we need it to do: clean water, make water, whatever. Make drinking water, I should say. Don't make water, really. We haven't got that far yet. So this, originally we were thinking about, you know, the wants and needs part is really the focus for the buyers, the people who are buying ecosystem services, the people who are buying benefits, investors, and the sellers, farmers and land managers are much more interested in these issues down here. And that our toolbox of interventions, whether it's nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based adaptation measures, they sit within this needs suitability kind of part of the equation. But then you think, well, there's no beneficiaries, there's no consumers on here. So if we put those on, really the focus of the public and citizens and communities is much more on this: what do they want? What do they want? You know, what do they need in terms of benefits? Where are they in terms of their baseline now, in terms of their social vulnerability to flooding or drought or indeed coronavirus? And how do we close that gap for them so that we do, you know, I hate to use the expression, but you know, it's been hijacked, but levelling up is, i.e. removing the discrepancy between the best well off in terms of environmental justice and injustice and the worst well off, is a really important thing to build into our narrative. So now we've made it a bit more sophisticated. So we've developed a theory of change, which to underpin our communication strategy, and we are this idea that we have long-term strategic goals in terms of where we want to get to. But these two gold panels on the right here about we want people to take action. What do we want them to do? What do we want them to say? How do we want them to act? And what do we need to do to connect with them, raise their awareness, change their attitude or change their behaviour, exchange information and learning with them? We're trying to get people into this sort of like pyramid of moving through to help to becoming people who are genuinely engaged and participating in creating a future vision and indeed realising that vision. So it helps us to understand the pathway to impact for what we're trying to do for our engagement activities and our communication work, and it helps us tailor the audience experience to maximise impact. And it helps us to monitor and evaluate our co-creation processes so that we can actually say whether or not we've been successful, which is sometimes something that we overlook. And I put this quote in here just because I found it and I liked it. Co-creation can be seen as a new way of thinking about the economical concept of value. And I think that's useful. So after all of this, I put together this kind of schematic in which I identified these 4 building blocks or pillars for building water resilient communities. And of course, we have to focus on the natural capital, the natural assets, and ecosystem-based adaptation. And all of that work in PROWATER is hugely well advanced. But at the same time, we have to also focus on building social capital with stakeholders right across the system and building knowledge capital, because understanding, as we know from our theory of change, if people understand and the system, they understand the stresses and the threats that we're under, then they're much more likely to engage and participate ultimately in the process of building that shared vision for the future. So I'm looking at the time and I'm absolutely staggered to discover that I'm not too bad in terms of timings. So I've just got a few examples of things that we've done so far in PROWATER that I was just going to very quickly go through. So in 2019, which seems a long time ago, obviously, we in September 2019, we convened a water resilience summit, and this was kind of our first attempt to try and start this conversation about water resilience and water sustainability, and particularly, you know, with the PROWATER kind of approach. It was a big event. We tried to make it as big as possible. We wanted to initiate an open and honest and inclusive conversation about water resilience now and in the future. It was very much aimed at a public audience. We wanted it to be a forum for the exchange of information, etc., etc. The sort of key ethos was listen, reflect, and question, and decide what you think and what you think of the question, are we resilient? Will we be resilient in the future? Yeah, build a shared understanding, start the process of building a shared vision for the future, discuss what resilience or non-resilience might mean for people, communities and businesses over the next few decades. Very, very broad, or tried to get it as broad as we possibly could. We weren't entirely successful, but we did okay. And really tried to get people to voice their worries and concerns and to raise questions that our expert panel, if you like, were going to answer. We had a whole panel of what we called resilience champions from all across the system, including the water industry, farming and all sorts of different backgrounds. We wanted them to give a really honest appraisal of the situation as it is now and answer people's questions and say if they didn't know. We wanted to reassure people, of course, because people are worried, but we didn't want to placate them or fob them off with platitudes. Don't worry, it'll be okay, because clearly it might not be. We are in an emergency situation, of course, but we said that we didn't want to scare people. We also didn't want to perpetuate what was quite clear, which was that most people think that nothing is being done, and that's clearly false. So we wanted to break that down. And these pictures they're a bit funny, really, because you look at them, it's only, what, 18 months ago. But I immediately think, oh gosh, they're a bit close together, aren't they? But obviously we didn't know about these things then. 130, 140 people in a room these days obviously would be a bit strange. But yeah, 130 people came along. We had 30 resilience champions. We went through a whole day of talks, flash talks, and we had 160 post-it notes with questions and concerns that people raised. And we've used this as a platform really to go on to the next stage of the process. We did some evaluation. We asked people before and after, how aware are you of the work being done? How ready are you to act and to change your lifestyle? And how worried are you about what water resilience issues in the future? And we were pleased to see that we raised people's awareness, we raised people's readiness and motivation to act or change their lifestyle. And some people got less worried and some people got more worried during the event. So we weren't entirely successful in reassuring people. But then I think, some of the messaging was pretty scary, so that's not necessarily a surprise. And then building on the Water Resilience Summit, we've then gone on and we've initiated a programme called Watertight, Water Resilient Communities. And this is just really starting still at the moment. I've created a Water Resilient Communities Fund within Westcountry Rivers Trust. We've had some donations and we've done some fundraising. I ran a half marathon and raised a couple of £100 that went into it, which was very tiring, but obviously worthy. We've also created a Water Resilience Hub, which is currently a virtual resource, which I may get the opportunity to show you, but I'll certainly share the link to. It was originally going to be a pop-up, actual physical installation that we'd take around to communities, but obviously that didn't work out. We're establishing a resilience cafe, a drop-in sort of shop where people can come along and ask their questions. Initiated the Watertight Challenge, which I did for 2 months last year, which is a challenge to try and live on less than 100 litres of water a day. But during a 6-week period of no rainfall in the middle of COVID lockdown, it wasn't that easy. But I've kept a video diary, so you can see that on the website. We've initiated a new project, the Water Resilient Communities Living Lab, and also another exciting new project with the Environment Agency nationally, developing some illustrations that depict water visions for the future. So just on that, it's very early days for this, and some of the wheels and the graphics that you saw earlier have come from this work, but trying to develop completely evidence-based illustrations of different parts of the landscape, and every single possible asset or feature in that landscape that has a connection to water sustainability, for example, will be depicted. So this is very, very early days. It's literally just starting, but again, trying to establish this narrative with all sorts of different audiences about what we're trying to do in ProWater, and obviously this is all hopefully very useful for the ProWater mission that we're on, to try and bring people into the water system properly. There's a screen grab from the Water Resilience Hub, and there's a screen grab from the Watertight Communities website, and there's me doing one of my video diaries I don't recommend that you watch them. Obviously, I wouldn't do that. But there are. It's again, it's a work in progress. But we're starting to build up quite an archive of information about how to be watertight and in your life. And it's a huge challenge. And I think even in the last few months in the UK, there's been a real upsurge in projects and activities looking to engage consumers in terms of water sustainability, but it is incredibly hard to do that engagement and to indeed get people to change the way that they act and behave and their attitude towards water, because it's been very perpetuated for a very long time that water is not expensive and it's not a problem. Right, that's the end. As I say, I am completely staggered about the timing of that. Catherine, I was just going to do a very quick demonstration of the Water Resilience Hub. Could I have another couple of minutes?
I was actually going to suggest that as well, because I don't see that many questions in the chat. So I think Nick can maybe have a little tour of the platform. And in the meantime, people can already start commenting in the comment section and putting their questions there. And I shall just do I shall give you a quick tour of it. It shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes. I just need to locate where it is. Here it is. Share. Well, people are obviously formulating their killer questions, or they're just, I've lulled them all to sleep. Are awake. You're curious to see.
Okie doke. So, can you see that?
I can. Yeah.
Hopefully you can see that full screen. So the original plan after the Water Resilience Summit was that I built a geodesic dome, which was called the Water Resilience Hub. And a year ago, literally a year ago, almost exactly, we had managed to get the hub. It was supposed to be like a library, a surgery where we were booked all through the summer last year to take the Water Resilience Hub out to climate events and village events and all sorts of different events where we were going to talk about water resilience and pro water. Obviously COVID-19 happened, and so most of last summer I took it upon myself to try and make a virtual Water Resilience Hub, which kind of did the same thing, like a learning resource, lots of information, and this is what it looks like at the moment. So the idea is that it's engaging. It is actually virtual reality space, but essentially it's an information place, a place for knowledge exchange. We've tried to put as much information, obviously relating to pro water, but also other aspects of. There's a section over here, and this is the atrium. There's a section over here about the Water Resilience Summit, and you can read the report of the summit, which is here, and go through all the presentations and so on from that. There's interactive resources like the catchment diagram that you can go through. There's an introduction to the hub itself, and there's me, unfortunately, again talking about where it came from and what the idea is. But then the idea then is you can go and explore. There's all sorts of different floors, and it's divided up according to. Hang on. There we go. Here's the floor guide. So you've got the atrium where we are now, and then you've got sections according to the bits of the system. So natural water cycle, human water cycle, the champions gallery, which is the resilience champions and case studies. There's a resilience cafe virtual, and there's a special exhibition on the watertight challenge. So if you can click through. Might take a moment to load, depending on internet issues. There we go. So you come up into a different section. This is the natural water cycle section, and then there's basically just a whole load of information for all sorts of different audiences. You can find out about climate change, you can learn about rivers, you can learn about soils, and there's all sorts of videos and other bits of information on here that you can watch in relation to soil health. There's an information point where you can sign up for the newsletter or ask questions. Lots of stuff, groundwater, estuaries and coasts, and so on and so forth. And the where should I go next? I haven't got much time, so I'll just take you up to the top floor. So the idea of the Water Resilience Cafe, again, is this sort of trying to create a collaborative space where people can drop in. It's supposed to be real. Obviously, it's not real. It's virtual. So there's ask an expert. So you can, if you've got a question about water resilience, we try to perpetuate that and give the people the idea about swap shop, which was something we did at the Water Resilience Summit. So they're trying to encourage people to exchange activity, resources, knowledge, information. If there's something you need, or you need some information, guidance, or training, then offer it. Ask for it here, but also offer something in exchange. And we were playing around with the idea of a directory of champions, water resilience champions, and organisations. So again, it's fairly rudimentary, dare I say, at the moment, but it's quite a few people have come forward asking to develop galleries on nature-based solutions. I think we're definitely going to have a PROWATER case studies section. This is the Watertight Challenge room. All the different examples of that kind of stuff. So really, we're just throwing it open. At Manchester University have come forward. They want to use it. They want to develop it and use it as a teaching resource for students in sustainability at Manchester University. So that's quite nice. It's really thrown open as an opportunity. If people see value in it and they think it might be useful, if they want to create an exhibit, then they're very welcome to. We haven't really done much promotion of it yet, but because it's not quite finished, but it will be. And so I just thought I'd share that with you.
Hans-Peter Verhoen has a question as well. Thank you, Nick, for a very overall covering of the subject. You mentioned the aspect of natural resource. A rather disruptive approach could be, what would happen if we treat waters as if it was oil? No one would dream of drilling for it for free. It would be heavily regulated. It would have a price tag on it, and its price would influence all the product prices that are produced using water. And I think it's an interesting.
I think so. So I think obviously it's a really interesting idea. I suppose the issue we have is that can disruptive approaches work with certain audiences? Now, in the past, disruptive approaches, i.e. trying to shock people or trying to shake people to wake up, come on, there's a climate emergency, come on, coming up with ideas, try and reframe it. Imagine water was oil, and imagine how you feel about it if you didn't have oil. But we have tried this so much. Imagine you go into the supermarket and there's no food. Well, we've been there now. We've been there. It happened last year. It happened a year ago. It happened, and now, have we achieved transformational change in the way that people see the system? No, everyone's going back to normal. A lot of people, perhaps, quietly thought that COVID would be the shock that triggered the transformational change, but it hasn't. It fills me with horror, the idea that we aren't going to take this opportunity, that COVID it's not an opportunity, it's a hateful, horrible thing that's happened to us all. But there is an opportunity post-COVID to initiate the transformational change that we need to go through, and we're not, at the moment, we're not doing it. So that worries me about these kind of, they seem like brilliant ideas, and it might work, but it's untested. And there is always a chance, there's the risk, the problem with the primary stakeholders, particularly with citizens, consumers, is that often you only get one chance to engage them and to influence them, because if you annoy them, or you scare them, or they disengage, then it can be almost impossible to get them back. So you have to be very, very careful. But the problem, because you're worried about the risks, you're worried about the barriers, sometimes that can paralyze you into inaction. And then I refer you back to what Greta Thunberg said, which is, we can't just sit and hope it's going to be okay, because it won't be. We need to act. So I feel like, and it's a long rambling answer, I know, but feels like we're getting to the point where we just, every now and then, in a quiet moment, I think maybe we should just scare people. Maybe we should be more disruptive. Maybe we should be more challenging. But if COVID hasn't scared people enough, then I'm not sure that we can scare people enough with climate change, because it's happening so very slowly. And you can show them the technical stuff, the red maps that show, you know, in 2050 there won't be any water. People just go, you know, 2050 is a long way away.
And thank you for your answer, Catherine. If you allow me to just say that there's much more to be said about it, but the disruptiveness would be in the euro. You hit them where it hurts with euros, so you would get their attention, and they have to do something. So, but let's leave it to there. It's much more.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating. Of course, it's a fascinating conversation. Any ideas that people have got to try and move this to gain traction with key audiences, I think, have to be taken into account. It's one of those things that, like in a workshop, we say there are no bad ideas, there are no silly ideas. Let's just come up with as many ideas as we can possibly get. And I think we have to try and stick to that rather than just saying it. We need to mean it. So I think anyone who's got any ideas about how we could do this would be gratefully received, definitely. Thank you very much. I have another question from, sorry for the background noise, by the way, my neighbor decided to cut the trees or something. But from Kees Peerdeman, how do the words demand and supply relate to resilience? Well, they kind of don't, but they do, obviously, in an indirect way. So resilience is something that a thing has. It is either resilient or it's not. You can't really have grades of resilience. You can't be a bit resilient, because resilience, the definition of resilience is the ability to bounce back, the ability to continue. If something is not resilient, then when there'll be a shock which comes along, which means that it fails in whichever way it would fail. Supply and demand is about, demand particularly is about pressure. So the enemy of resilience is stress. So as humans and wildlife get stressed, their resilience, in the broadest possible sense, not stress as in I'm having a stressful day at work, but stressed as in socioeconomic, sociocultural stress. Then as stress goes up, then resilience goes down. So for me, demand is a negative pressure on the system, and so it degrades resilience. Supply is basically what you get if something is resilient. If it's continuing, it will continue to supply the benefits or the functions that it should. So normally, when resilience fails, when pressure reaches a tipping point where resilience is overwhelmed, then you have a failure in the system, and supply will be one of the things that the system service will cease. But I think, again, recent conversations, people are saying we need to get beyond resilience, because resilience is kind of like the bare minimum. Of course, we want to survive, but it's not about surviving. We want to thrive. And so that sustainability in the truest possible sense, and particularly in multiple domains, is about thriving. We want a future vision for a landscape and a water system where we are thriving as a species, and where wildlife is thriving in the natural environment. Resilience for me is a bit of a negative, kind of given up kind of word, because it's like, are we resilient? No. Do we want to be resilient in the future? Yes. Would we be satisfied if we were just resilient in the future? Possibly not. I think we could probably go a bit better than that. I think we should aim to be, for Nexus convergence, i.e. sustainability right across all of the sustainability outcomes in the Nexus. There's no reason why we can't do that if we have the transformational change in the way that we do things now. So you had a good overview, and I think the tools that we talked about today, the water system maps and the water resilience hub in terms of communication, if you want to reach out to us and have a chat, for example, with Jan Staes or Nick Pelling, definitely visit the ProWater website, or simply send us an email, you should have my contact details, to reach out to us.
So without further ado, I want to thank you all for being here today. I think I'm at least looking forward to 2021 in terms of more upcoming events. And like I said, we're halfway, but we're still far away from where we want to get. For example, in September, we have the international workshop coming up, and we'll definitely save the date for that somewhere around summer. Something to look forward to, and it's more related to the financial aspects, so work package 1 of PROWATER that Nick also touched upon, the social side, basically. So I'm not gonna keep you here too long. I'm sure you still have other meetings to attend.